Tonight we tell the story of one of the oldest and quietest figures in all of Tolkien's legendarium. A lord not remembered for great battles, not for dragon slaying, not for crowns or conquest, but for waiting, for building, for guiding others home. His name was Círdan the Shipwright, an ancient elf standing upon the shores of the Grey Havens, silent, wise, watching as others depart. But behind that brief image lies one of the longest lives in Middle-earth. He saw the Elder Days. He witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms. He watched Morgoth, Sauron, and countless kings pass into history. And through all those ages, he remained beside the sea, waiting. Tonight, we journey farther back than almost any story we have told before, to a world before kingdoms, before Numenor, before Gondolin, before even the rising of the sun and moon. So before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy relaxing journeys through Tolkien's world. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. Now dim the lights, get comfortable. Listen to distant waves touching a forgotten shore, and let us travel to the beginning. Before the sun, before the moon, when Middle-earth lay beneath starlight alone. In those ancient days, the elves awoke beside the waters of Quevian men. There were no kingdoms, no great cities, only starlight reflected in still waters and wonder. The first elves opened their eyes to a silent world. They saw stars before they saw sunlight, and perhaps because of that, starlight remained forever sacred to them. Among those first generations arose three great kindreds: the Vanya, the Noldor, and the Teleri. Círdan belonged to the Teleri. This matters deeply. For of all the elven kindreds, the Teleri loved water most. They loved rivers, lakes, rain, and above all, the sea. Even before many of them had seen it, something within them longed for distant shores. They were patient where others were restless, gentle where others were proud, slow to anger, slow to haste, but deep in feeling. Círdan inherited all these qualities. Even in the earliest songs, he is not remembered as the strongest or most dazzling among the Eldar. He is remembered differently: steady, reliable, enduring. These qualities rarely attract attention in youth, but ages later, they become priceless. When the Valar summoned the elves westward, many began the great journey. A migration unlike anything the world had seen. Across vast lands they traveled: mountains, forests, rivers, uncounted leagues beneath endless stars. Many turned aside. Some refused the journey. Others pressed onward. Among the Teleri walked one elf who listened carefully to every river, every wind, every distant sound. Cirdan. Though young by elven measure, he already carried unusual patience. Others looked ahead. He noticed what remained behind. Others sought glory. He noticed duty. Even then, something about him felt different. As the journey continued westward, the longing within the Teleri deepened, not merely for destination, for water, for shores, for something they could feel but not yet name. And at last, they heard it, a sound no song had prepared them for. The sea, the endless rhythm of waves meeting shore. the deep voice of Belegar. When the Teleri first beheld the great sea, many stood speechless. Some wept, some laughed, some felt as though they had found a forgotten part of themselves. Cirdan stood among them, and something changed forever. Others saw beauty. Cirdan saw calling, not ambition, not power, purpose. He did not know it yet, but from this moment onward, the sea would shape his entire existence. For while kings would rise and kingdoms would fall, Cirdan would remain by the water, watching, waiting, building the paths that carried others home. From that day onward, the sea was no longer merely something Cirdan had seen. It became part of him. Its rhythm entered his thoughts. Its voice lingered even in silence. The endless rise and fall of waves seemed to speak of something older than language, something ancient, something eternal. The Teleri remained long upon the shores, longer than the Vanyar, longer than the Noldor. This too suited their nature. They were never a people of haste. Where others moved quickly toward destiny, the Teleri paused to listen, to feel, to understand. They learned the moods of the sea, the changing winds, the pull of tides, the language of gulls and salt and storm. And among them, Cirdan became increasingly drawn not only to the beauty of the waters, but to what the waters required: craft, skill, patience. He began studying wood differently, not merely as timber, as possibility. A fallen tree became more than wood and bark. It became shape, curvature, structure, buoyancy. He learned how grain bent under pressure, how certain woods resisted water, how weight could be balanced against movement. None of this came from formal teaching. No master shipwright yet existed, because no ships yet existed. Cirdan was learning from observation, from the sea itself. This is what made him extraordinary. Many elves admired the sea. Cirdan understood it. The difference mattered. As years passed, another longing grew among the Teleri: to cross, to move upon the waters rather than nearly beside them. But the sea was vast, beautiful, yes, yet unforgiving. A single mistake upon open water could mean death. Most hesitated. Cirdan did not. Where others saw danger, he saw a challenge worthy of patience. He began shaping the earliest vessels. Simple at first, small craft, frames of carefully chosen wood, bound and sealed with methods learned through experimentation. Not elegant, not yet, but functional. The first boats touched the water and floated. The moment changed history. Because a boat is more than wood. It is possibility made tangible. It is the promise that distance may be crossed, that separation need not remain permanent, that horizons can be approached. The Teleri marveled. Some stepped into the small craft nervously, others with excitement. The waters carried them, and something awakened among the sea elves. A future. Though he did not yet bear the title, Cirdan had already come what history would remember. A shipwright, not merely a builder of vessels, a builder of passage, a maker of journeys. That distinction would define his life. For countless ages to come, Cirdan would build not for conquest, but for crossing. Not for war, but for passage. Not to carry armies, but souls. The years continued. Many of the Teleri eventually crossed into Aman. Many entered the Blessed Realm. Yet not all departed at once. Some lingered, some delayed. Some remained behind, and among those who remained, Cirdan's purpose only deepened. He discovered something profound. Not everyone travels at the same pace. Not everyone is ready to depart when others are. Some hesitate, some fear change. Some must stay behind to help others move forward. That realization shaped him more deeply than any craft. Cirdan began to understand a quiet truth. There are those who lead from the front, and there are those who remain behind, so no one is left alone. He belonged to the second kind. This is why Cirdan feels so different from other legendary elves. Fëanor burned brightly. Galadriel radiated power and wisdom. Gil-galad stood as king. Elrond became counselor and healer. But Cirdan remained, always near the shore, always ensuring others could continue their journey. He became something rare even among the Eldar, a guardian of thresholds, a keeper of departures, one who stood between lands, between ages, between staying and leaving. As centuries passed, his appearance changed in a way unusual among elves. Tolkien notes something extraordinary about Cirdan. He wore a beard, a rare sign among elves, an outward reflection of immense age. Age not measured in weakness, but in long endurance, in patience accumulated over ages beyond counting. And still he waited by the sea. Still he built. Still he watched horizons. Kings would later seek his counsel. Great lords would honor him. Ring-bearers would trust him. But those stories lay far ahead. For now, Cirdan remained what he had become beside the first shores, an elf shaped by water and waking, a craftsman of passage, a servant of quiet duty. And as the first age approached with all its fire and sorrow, Cirdan would find that his calling had only just begun. For soon, the world would need ships unlike any ever built before. Ships not for exploration, not for beauty, but for survival. The first age came not as a single storm, but as gathering thunder. Far in the north, darkness rose once more. Morgoth returned to Middle-earth in power. His fortresses multiplied. His armies spread. The long peace shattered. Kingdoms that had barely begun to flourish suddenly found themselves living beneath shadow. War came, fire came, sorrow came, and like so many of the Eldar, Cirdan watched the world change around him. Yet even as war consumed vast lands, his purpose remained tied to the sea. By now, he had become lord among his people, not through conquest, not through ambition, but through trust. The Teleri looked to him because he had become what few could ever become: steady. In ages of chaos, steadiness becomes priceless. It was during these years that Cirdan settled upon the western shores of Beleriand. There, near the great waters, he established the havens of the Falas. Breathambar, Eglarest, ports of refuge, cities of ships, and salt and sea wind. They were unlike the grand hidden kingdoms of the Noldor. No towering mountain walls, no secret valleys, no glittering underground halls. Instead, the Falas lived openly beside the waves. The cries of seabirds filled the air. Harbors stretched into gray waters. White foam broke against weathered stone. And everywhere there were ships, more ships than Middle-earth had ever seen. Círdan's craft had matured beyond anything imagined in earlier ages. The small boats of his youth were now memories. His vessels had become elegant and strong. High-prowed ships that cut through rough waters. Broad vessels capable of carrying many souls. Swift ships that danced with the wind. Wood bent beneath his hands as though it remembered the sea. Sails caught air like living wings. Ropes, timber, mast, and sail became instruments of harmony. He did not merely build ships, he understood them. Each vessel was a balance, weight and lift, strength and flexibility, control and surrender. To sail well meant respecting the sea, never trying to dominate it. This philosophy reflected Cirdan himself. He did not seek mastery through force. He worked with what was, never against its nature. That wisdom made him beloved. But the havens were not merely centers of craft. They became sanctuaries. And that role grew more important with every passing year. As Morgoth's wars worsened, refugees began arriving. Families fleeing ruined settlements, messengers carrying terrible news, wounded soldiers, lost children, the displaced, the grieving. All came west, and at the shores, Cirdan received them, again and again. The havens became places of last hope. This became one of the defining truths of Cirdan's life. He was rarely at the center of great battles, yet he stood at the place where survivors arrived afterward. History often remembers warriors. It remembers kings who charge into battle. It remembers shining victories and legendary duels. But there is another kind of hero. The one waiting at the shore. The one who receives the broken. The one who ensures survivors still have somewhere to go. That was Cirdan. Again and again. Through siege, through defeat, through loss. He remained. The wars of Beleriand grew increasingly desperate. Great realms fell, heroes perished, entire peoples vanished. Still, the havens endured, for a time. But even sanctuaries attract shadow. Morgoth understood something simple. Hope survives where refuge survives. Destroy the refuge, and despair spreads. So the Falas became targets. The assault came with terrible force. Armies of orcs descended upon the coast. Fire reached the harbors. The cries of battle missed with crashing waves. Ships burned. Walls fell. Breathambar fell. Eglarest fell. The havens were broken. The cities Cirdan had built were lost. Another kingdom erased by war. Many would have broken then. Many would have surrendered to grief. Cirdan did not. This is perhaps his most remarkable quality. He endured loss without losing purpose. The cities were gone. The calling remained. So he gathered survivors, loaded ships, rescued those he could, and withdrew to the Isle of Valar. There, amid uncertainty and sorrow, he began again. Once more. That phrase follows Cirdan through every age. Begin again. build again, wait again, hope again. The Isle of Balar became the new refuge, a final sanctuary in the dying world. And there, amid refugees and fading hope, Cirdan built some of the most important ships in all the Elder Days. Because soon, one mariner would arrive carrying a destiny greater than any before. A mariner whose voyage would change the fate of elves and men alike. His name was Arundel, and Cirdan would help carry his hope across the sea. The Isle of Balar became a refuge for the weary, not a kingdom of splendor, not a fortress of glory, but a place where hope still breathed. Ships came and went across gray waters. Refugees arrived carrying grief. And through all of it, Cirdan remained as he always had, steady, patient, watching the sea. It was there that Arundel came often, young at first, restless, driven by a longing few fully understood. Even among elves and men, there was something different about him. He seemed born for horizons, born for distant waters, born for a journey no one else could complete. Cirdan recognized this. Some souls were shaped for waiting, others for voyaging. Arundel belonged to the second kind, so Cirdan helped him. He built for him a ship unlike any before, Vingilat, foam flower, swift, graceful, strong enough for waters no ordinary vessel could survive. This was no ordinary commission. Even before the voyage began, something about it felt larger than craft, larger than shipbuilding. Destiny had entered the harbor. When Arundel sailed west, he carried more than his own hope. He carried the final plea of a broken world, the plea of elves and men who could no longer endure Morgoth's shadow. And because one ship could cross impossible waters, history changed. The Valar heard, the War of Wrath came, Morgoth fell, the First Age ended, the world changed once more. Beleriand sank beneath the sea, entire kingdoms vanished forever. Rivers disappeared, mountains broke, cities were swallowed by water. What generations had known as homeland became memory. And once again, Cirdan watched the world reshape itself. By now, he had seen this pattern many times. Rise, beauty, loss, silence. Most beings struggle with change. Cirdan lived through so much of it that change became almost like weather. Painful, yes, but inevitable. He learned something rare, how to mourn without becoming bitter. That wisdom made him unlike nearly anyone else in Middle-earth. When the Second Age began, many elves faced a choice: return west or remain. Many departed. Many sailed toward Valinor at last. Cirdan could have gone. No one would have questioned it. He had endured more than most, served longer than Muriel. Surely he had earned rest, yet he remained. This decision reveals the heart of Cirdan more clearly than anything else. He stayed because others still needed passage, others still needed guidance, others still needed a harbor. As long as souls remained in Middle-earth longing for the sea, someone needed to wait at the shore. So Cirdan built again. He established new havens, the Grey Havens, Mithlond. There upon the western shores of Lindon, his greatest harbor rose, became a place unlike any other in Middle-earth. threshold, a place between worlds. Those arriving felt peace, those departing felt sorrow, and Cirdan stood at the meeting point of both. The Grey Havens carried a strange beauty. White gulls wheeled through salt-heavy air. Tall masts swayed gently with the tides. The sound of ropes creaking in sea wind became constant music. Mist rolled over quiet waters at dawn. At sunset, the western horizon burned gold, and always there were ships. Waiting, the Second Age brought great powers. Numenor rose from the sea. Its kings became mighty, its fleets unmatched. Elven realms flourished. Gil-galad ruled in Lindon. Sauron rose once more. Kingdoms formed and fell. Wars returned. Ages passed. Still, Cirdan remained. This is what makes his story so haunting. Most famous figures in Tolkien's legendarium blaze brightly. Fëanor burns like fire. Gandalf arrives in dramatic turning points. Aragorn carries destiny. Cirdan does something quieter. He endures. Century after century, he watches generations become dust. Kings he advises die. Children he once welcomed become legends. Then forgotten names. Still, he remains by the sea, waiting. The waiting itself becomes sacred. Not passive waiting, purposeful waiting. He understands something few others do. Not every great deed is action. Some are patience, some are remaining. Some are simply being present when the moment finally arrives. And Cirdan would wait for one such moment. A moment in the Third Age. A ship arriving from the west, bearing not kings, not armies, but 5 old men. 5 strangers cloaked as wanderers. Of all the great and wise in Middle-earth, Cirdan alone would immediately understand what one of them truly was. And in that recognition, he would shape the fate of the world once again. The Third Age had not yet begun, but the shadow had already returned. Sauron rose once more in the Second Age, not with the raw violence of Morgoth, but with patience and cunning. He deceived, he whispered, he promised power. Kingdoms that had survived one darkness now found themselves threatened by another, and in Lindon, beside the Western Sea, 2 of the wisest elves in Middle-earth stood watch, Gil-galad and Cirdan. Their friendship was not built upon spectacle, not upon dramatic moments sung by minstrels. It was built upon something quieter. Trust, deep trust forged over centuries. Gil-galad ruled as High King of the Noldor, young by Cirdan's standards, though ancient beyond mortal comprehension. Wise, noble, far-seeing, he carried the burden of kingship with grace. And yet, even kings need counsel, especially the wise ones, perhaps most of all the wise ones. Cirdan became one of Gil-galad's most trusted allies. This reveals much about both of them. Gil-galad possessed brilliance, leadership, strength, but Cirdan possessed perspective. He had lived through ages beyond counting. He remembered the elder days. He remembered Morgoth. He remembered what unchecked darkness became when ignored too long. Where younger rulers might react to immediate danger, Cirdan saw patterns across centuries. That kind of wisdom cannot be learned quickly. It is earned through endurance. This made him invaluable. When rumors spread of strange movements in the east, Cirdan noticed. When travelers brought uneasy news, Cirdan listened. When shadows lengthened where peace once lived, Cirdan remembered. He had seen this before. Darkness rarely returns loudly. It begins at the edges, in whispers, in subtle changes, in the uneasy feeling that something old is waking. Sauron eventually revealed himself openly. War followed. The War of the Elves and Sauron reshaped the age. Kingdoms burned. Idrian fell. Celebrimbor perished. Once more, the free peoples stood upon the edge of ruin, and once more, Cirdan remained where he was needed, at the Havens, at Lindon, beside Gil-galad. The Grey Havens became more than a port. They became lifelines. Supplies moved through them. Refugees arrived through them. Communication with allies depended upon them. Without Cirdan, the western defenses of Lindon would have weakened catastrophically. But he endured, as always. When Numenor sent aid against Sauron, Cirdan witnessed another turning point. Men had grown mighty, very mighty. Their ships rivaled even the greatest works of the Eldar. Many elves looked upon Numenor with admiration, some with concern. Some with concern. Cirdan felt both. He understood a truth many ignored. Greatness often carries temptation. Power invites pride. Pride invites ruin. And sadly, time proved him right. Numenor fell. Another mighty realm lost to arrogance. Another catastrophe swallowed by the sea. For Cirdan, the tragedy carried familiar sorrow. Again, he watched greatness collapse. Again, he watched survivors flee ruin. Again, he helped receive the broken. Elendil and the faithful came to Middle-earth. And once more, Cirdan stood at the threshold between ending and beginning. This became the strange rhythm of his life. Others saw endings. He saw transitions. When one age died, he prepared for the next. When one kingdom fell, he helped shelter what remained. The last alliance came. Gil-galad marched east. Elendil marched beside him. Armies gathered. The final great war of the Second Age began. And for one of the few times in his long existence, Cirdan did not march to the center of the war. He remained behind. Some might misunderstand this. Some might think absence meant lesser importance. But Cirdan understood duty better than glory. Not every wise leader belongs on the battlefield. Some must preserve what survives. Some must ensure there remains a world worth saving. So he stayed at the Havens, watching the western sea, waiting. Then news came, victory and grief. Sauron had fallen, but Gil-galad was dead. The last High King of the Noldor had perished. An age ended. The news struck deeply. Few losses could wound the Eldar more. Gil-galad had been more than king. He had been one of the last great bridges to the Elder Days. Now he too was gone, and Cirdan remained. Again, he outlived yet another king, another friend, another age. was the loneliest burden of immortality. Not endless life, endless farewell. Again and again, Cirdan watched those he loved depart. Still he remained. Still he waited. Still he served. By the dawn of the Third Age, only a handful remained who remembered the oldest days. Among them, Cirdan stood as one of the eldest, quiet, ancient, bearded. The Third Age began in uneasy peace. Sauron had fallen, his body destroyed, his army scattered, Barad-dûr broken. And yet, among the wisest in Middle-earth, few believed the danger had truly ended. Cirdan certainly did not. He had lived too long to mistake silence for safety. He understood something history had taught him again and again. Darkness rarely disappears forever. It retreats, it regathers, it waits. So while kingdoms rebuilt and mortals spoke of victory, Cirdan continued his quiet watch at the Grey Havens. The sea remained unchanged. Waves rolled upon the shore. Gulls cried above white masts. Ships came and went. But the shipwright had learned to listen not only to the sea, but to the world itself. And after long centuries, he felt something stirring once more. Not darkness, something else. A movement from the west. A purpose carried across the sea. Then, one day, a ship arrived. It came not as a war fleet, not with banners, not with kings, only a quiet vessel crossing silver waters. Upon it were 5 figures, old men. At least, that is how they appeared, bent with age, clothed as wanderers, carrying staffs, no crowns, no armor, no outward majesty. To nearly any other observer, they would have seemed ordinary, strange, perhaps, but ordinary. Cirdan knew better. The moment he beheld them, he understood. These were no mortal men. No wandering sages, no simple pilgrims. They were Maiar, spirits of the same order as Sauron, ancient beings clothed in mortal form, sent from the Blessed Realm, sent by the Vala. This recognition reveals perhaps more about Cirdan's wisdom than almost any other moment in his story. None of the younger races could have perceived this immediately. Few among the Eldar could. But Cirdan had spent ages learning to see beyond appearances. He understood that true greatness often arrives quietly, not with spectacle, not with power displayed openly, but with purpose hidden beneath humility. Of the 5, one drew his attention most strongly. Not the tallest, not the most imposing, not the most commanding. An old wanderer, clothed in gray, his face weathered, his frame lean, his appearance almost unremarkable beside the others. Yet within him burned something extraordinary. Compassion, pity, resolve, a quiet fire. This was Gandalf. Though he had not yet become known by that name among men, Cirdan looked upon him and saw what others would take centuries to understand. Not merely wisdom, hope. He perceived that this gray wanderer would bear burdens beyond measure, that he would walk among the weak, aid the humble, strengthen the fearful, and resist the temptation of domination. That mattered greatly, for Círdan had seen power corrupt even the mighty. He had watched kings fall, realms collapse, greatness become pride. What he saw in Gandalf was different. Strength without hunger for control. Power restrained by compassion. Wisdom tempered by mercy. Rare qualities, perhaps the rarest. And so Cirdan did something extraordinary. He gave away one of the greatest treasures in Middle-earth, Narya, the Ring of Fire, one of the Three Elven Rings. A treasure entrusted originally to him, a relic of immense power. He surrendered it freely, not reluctantly, not after long hesitation. Freely. This tells us everything about Cirdan. He never clung to power for its own sake. He valued purpose above possession. He understood that a gift becomes meaningful only when placed where it is most needed. And he knew Gandalf would need it. The Ring of Fire held a subtle power, not domination, not conquest. Its strength lay elsewhere. It inspired courage, kindled hope, strengthened hearts against despair. Could any gift have suited Gandalf better, or any decision reflected Cirdan more perfectly? The oldest shipwright in Middle-earth recognized the one who would carry hope into the darkest places, and he equipped him, not with armies, not with titles, with fire, the inner fire that resists surrender. As Gandalf departed the havens, Cirdan gave him words that would echo through the ages. He told him that though his labors would be heavy, he would aid all hearts willing to resist tyranny. It was not merely blessing, it was recognition. One ancient guardian of hope recognizing another. After the Astari departed, Cirdan returned to the shore, as he always did, watching, waiting. Ages passed again. Kingdoms shifted. Arnor fell. Gondor weakened. The shadow returned. And still the shipwright remained. By now, his life had stretched across nearly all recorded history of Middle-earth. He had seen stars before the sun. He had seen the Elder Days. He had watched the first, second, and third ages unfold. And through all of it, he remained what he had always been, a keeper of passage, a guardian of endings, a steward of departures. But one final duty remained, the greatest and most bittersweet of all. For the time was approaching when the last great ships would sail west, and soon Cirdan himself would finally depart. At last, the War of the Ring came to its end. The One Ring was destroyed. Sauron fell. Barad-dûr collapsed into ruin, and with its fall, the Third Age drew toward its final twilight. Across Middle-earth, there was celebration. Cities rejoiced. Kingdoms began to heal. The long shadow had passed. Yet, among the Eldar, victory carried another feeling. Not sorrow, not grief alone. Something quieter. Completion. For the elves understood what many among men did not. Sauron's fall did not restore the old world. It marked its ending. The age of elves in Middle-earth was passing. Magic itself had begun to fade. The ancient power that once preserved hidden realms, protected enchanted forests, and sustained timeless beauty was diminishing. Lothlorien would fade. Rivendell would empty. The great elven kingdoms would become memory. The dominion of men had begun, and at the Grey Havens, Cirdan already knew. He had known for a long time. This was the ending he had waited for across 3 ages. The final departures had begun. One by one, the great Eldar came to the western shores. Not as rulers, not as warriors, but as weary travelers at the end of long journeys. Galadriel came. Elrond came. Ancient powers whose names had shaped history now arrived not in triumph, but in peace. The great stories were ending, the old songs nearing their final note. And as always, Cirdan waited at the shore. The same shore, the same sea, the same endless horizon. Only now, he no longer waited merely for others. He waited for himself. Then came one final company, small, quiet, almost humble. And yet, among them walked those who had carried the fate of the world. Bilbo, old beyond ordinary hobbit years, fragile but gentle. Frodo, wounded in ways no healer could fully mend. Gandalf, still gray, still calm, still carrying the quiet fire Cirdan had recognized long ago. And beside them stood Sam, Merry, and Pippin. Friends bound by love stronger than war. The evening air was cool. Waves rolled softly against the harbor. White gulls drifted in the fading light. There was no grand ceremony, no crowds, only stillness. The kind of stillness that comes when words are too small. Cirdan watched them approach, and perhaps, after thousands upon thousands of years, he felt something almost unfamiliar, the weight of finality. For among those approaching was Gandalf, the pilgrim he had welcomed centuries earlier, the wanderer to whom he had entrusted Narya. And now that wanderer returned, his task complete. The old shipwright looked upon him and knew. The mission of the Istari had ended. Hope had endured. The fire had not gone out. Cirdan's faith had been justified. Gandalf had done what he was sent to do. He had not conquered. He had guided. He had awakened courage in the small and humble. Just as Cirdan had foreseen, there is something deeply beautiful in this symmetry. Long ago, Cirdan welcomed Gandalf to Middle-earth. Now he welcomed him home. A full circle across centuries. Perhaps that is why Cirdan's story feels so different from others. He was never the center of the great battles. He stood at beginnings and endings, at arrivals and departures, at thresholds, always at thresholds. That was his true calling. Not shipwright alone, ferryman of ages, keeper of transitions, guardian of farewell. The ship stood ready, white, elegant, silent upon silver waters, built with mastery refined across ages beyond counting. Perhaps his finest work. Or perhaps every ship had always been practice for this final voyage, the last ship west, the last great departure. Cirdan looked once more upon Middle-earth, upon the shores he had guarded since before the sun. He had seen stars before moonlight. He had walked lands now buried beneath oceans. He had known kings whose names were forgotten. He had watched entire civilizations rise and vanish. He had endured Morgoth, Sauron, war, sorrow, loss, farewell after farewell. And still he had remained. Until now. This is perhaps the most moving truth about Cirdan. He stayed longer than almost anyone, not because he feared leaving, because others still needed him. He postponed rest for ages beyond counting. He remained so others could depart. He waited so others would not leave alone. What greater act of service exists? At last, there was no more reason to remain. The final great burden had passed. The final great war had ended. The final great travelers had arrived. So Cirdan stepped aboard. At last, the oldest mariner of the Eldar, the shipwright, the keeper of havens, the patient guardian of shores. He who had sent countless others west now sailed west himself. The sails caught the wind. The ship moved. Slowly at first, then steadily. Water parted beneath the hull. The gray havens receded. The shores of Middle-earth grew distant. Mist gathered over the sea. The horizon softened, and somewhere beyond mortal sight lay Amen, the blessed realm, home. After all the ages, home. No songs describe exactly what Cirdan felt in that final passage, but perhaps none are needed. Some journeys transcend words, and so ended the tale of Círdan the Shipwright. Not with battle, not with glory, not with conquest, but with something truer to who he had always been. A voyage, for in the end, Cirdan teaches something rare. Not all heroes change history through force. Some change history through patience, through faithfulness, through remaining when remaining is hard, through helping others reach shores they cannot reach alone. While brighter legends burned and faded, Cirdan endured, quietly, steadily, like the sea itself. And perhaps that is why, among all the great lords of Middle-earth, he feels uniquely peaceful. He asks for nothing, claims nothing, seeks no glory. He simply serves and waits until the time comes to sail. The end.